Good morning from Brisbane, Australia. We are live from Yoga, Healing and Spirituality Convergence Room. So we have a wonderful session with Dr. Joanna Kujawa, and she'll be talking about divine feminine throughout ages. We had an amazing session on Monday with Dr. Joanna, and it was on Shakti. We had so many questions for her. It was a wonderful, wonderful presentation. So take the floor, Joanna.
Thank you. Thank you for this wonderful introduction, Irina. And today we have a more intimate space, which is actually very nice for any discussion. So if anyone on Facebook also will have any questions, please ask them at any time. And you know, I'm happy to interrupt my presentation and discuss the questions. I just prepared something, but it's not a speech. You know, I hope that it's going to be interactive. So as I said, I welcome questions. Now I'll just share my presentation with you. This is something basically that reminds me, you know, what I'm going to talk about, and also gives everybody an idea with images, right? So I'm posting images of different divine feminine and their representations. So just very quickly, what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to talk about the narratives of divine feminine throughout the ages, and I will focus on Western traditions mostly this time, because on Monday, as Irina said, I was talking about Hinduism primarily, but I'll also make some parallels to Buddhism and so on. And why we need to change the narratives of divine feminine. And this is just my argument and my idea. I do not pretend I have any, you know, great answers. So in a way, it is also to challenge you, you know, if you disagree with me, by all means, you know. So you say, oh no, I like how divine feminine it is right now. That's perfectly fine. I just feel that we have to change how we interpret divine feminine, and this is what I'll focus on in today's presentation. And I will briefly discuss the Divine Mother, which is the most popular, especially in traditional settings. Then the Creatrix, which is almost forgotten in nowadays, because, you know, most Asian traditions talk about the Creatrix in the feminine. So I'm going to focus a little bit on this. The feminine as a central deity. So I'm going to discuss Sumer and so on, and feminine as divine wisdom. And here I'm going to discuss the tradition of Sophia and Mary Magdalene. And Mary Magdalene is my life at this stage. So, you know, if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to discuss it. And then I will close with indigenous traditions of North America and Europe primarily, and how they actually got it right from the beginning, and how we strayed away from this. So it's a little bit, quite a bit to cover. So I will really I'm looking forward to your guidance. So you just tell me what would you like me to expand on, and you can say, no, Joanna, skip that one. I'm perfectly fine with this, right? Because, you know, overview of divine feminine throughout the ages, it's a lot. So I would like to welcome everybody, Irina, Betsy, Julie, Morgana, thank you for being here. And I welcome questions at any time and suggestions. So the first question I think that we need to ask ourselves, and again, Irina, if I speak too fast, let me know, okay? The first question that we have to ask ourselves is, where is divine feminine in religious narratives? Because let's call it religious narratives. Why? Because it is quite a funny thing that when we talk about beliefs of ancient times, we call them myths. And when we talk about religions nowadays, we talk about theology. So already here, we kind of degrading the myth, right? Traditionally, because this is just a myth, you know. It just happens that divine feminine is very closely associated with the myth, right? So instead of saying theology or myth, you know, that's why I talk about narratives, because this is what it is, the story of the divine. And the reason why I use the terminology such as divine, because I think that the God is sometimes misunderstood and kind of gender oriented, and some modern people in the West especially have an issue with this word. So since we are talking about narratives, so this is just a little bit of an introduction, and the myths, because the divine feminine is very often in the ancient mythologies or narratives, I would like to bring up Joseph Campbell, whom I completely adore, and who said something about the language of the myth. He said that language of a myth is different than the rational mind creates. It's mostly in images, in metaphors. It's more mystical, so to speak. So we have to translate, so to speak, the language of a myth to uncover the ancient narratives of divine feminine. So this is just an introduction, because it will make sense a little bit later. The divine feminine is spoken in different ways, so to speak, than the divine masculine, which is very rational and word-oriented. Divine feminine is more intuitive and more, which is actually a form of higher wisdom, and I'll talk about it later, and more image-oriented and more mystical in perceptions. So let's move towards this. I decided to start with the most common, especially in current religions, representations of the divine feminine, which is the Virgin Mother. I was brought up as a Catholic, or mother, right? So the divine mother. It maybe sounds a little bit better. But I am, and I wonder how you feel about it, I'm in constant argument with the divine mother personally, right? Especially how she was portrayed in my original religion, because I am a former Catholic, not anymore. And what is it as a child, of course I loved her, but then by the time I was at university, I really resented this image of divine feminine thrown at me as only the receptive part of me. And I think this actually image represents, and that's maybe a little bit radical, so please hold on and also disagree with me if you want to, very often represents what's wrong with the current system, because it represents this receptive feminine that basically is there waiting for the kind of the burden masculine to comfort it. And why the masculine is, or men need to be comforted, because the system works against them as well, so to speak, right? So there's this, I think, kind of masculine imagination of this Virgin Mother who is always there available for us, who has none of her own wishes. She just is there to comfort us, right? And of course, in my tradition, she was portrayed also as a Virgin Mother. So I also had an issue with this, simply because I thought that this divine feminine, represented as such, is disconnected from nature. So, okay. So I would say all has negative things, and then I would say all good things. So please do not get upset with me. I'm not against the Divine Mother. So, however, I did some research, and I realized, for example, that there is this one scholar, her name is, I think, Margherita Rigoloso, who wrote a book about the cult of divine birth. And actually, in most tradition, in most narratives of divine feminine, there is this idea of divine birth, of a virgin birth. However, the virgin part was not sexual, as it was later interpreted by the old patriarchs. It meant spiritually open. It means spiritually open and meant spiritually pure, so to speak. So with spiritual aspirations. So that kind of softened my perception of the Divine Mother and this idea of virgin birth. And in fact, it goes in centuries and centuries and even millennia of many mystic Western traditions, this idea of virgin birth, which is basically a human woman giving birth to a divine being through the contact, some kind of mysterious contact with the divine being. That in itself is very interesting. And also, I realized that Virgin Mother, or the Mother, Divine Mother in Western tradition, actually was promoted by many women. So, for example, in the 6th century, there was an Empress Pulcheria, who actually made Virgin Mary one of the main deities in Christianity. She was an empress herself, and she wanted to have some kind of image of the divine feminine that is empowering. Because as you can understand, there were not actually images anymore around of the divine feminine. All gods were masculine, they were warrior gods. And there's a story behind it, but you know, we don't have time at this moment to get into it. And it was quite interesting to learn for me through a colleague who is a scholar that also at the same time there was a Chinese empress in the 7th century, Wu Zetian, who did the same with Queen Yan, or Queen, right? Queen, who also wanted, you know, to bring up the divine feminine into the pantheon in here of Chinese gods. So it's quite interesting that women were always active in bringing up the divine feminine after it was covered up, and I'm going to talk about it in a moment, after it was edited out from our system and our beliefs, so to speak. So this is my take on Virgin Mother. Anyone has any questions? Because I know that she's also beloved to many, but and it's important, it is in a very important archetype of the divine feminine, but I mean, what I'm trying to say here, it is that it was kind of readjusted by what I would call masculine or patriarchal imagination. You know, this kind of a mother that is a virgin, that is connected from nature, who is always there who is always there for us without her own desires. But if somebody has an argument about it, you can ask now or later. Now, Tara is the equivalent of kind of a divine mother, although not a virgin necessarily, in Tibetan Buddhism especially. And what I like about Tara is that she's a very strong divine feminine. She apparently was, as the narratives of her life say, she was once a princess called Yeshedawa, and she decided, she was moved by compassion, so it's very much like Divine Mother, which is a beautiful quality of a Divine Mother, compassion towards humanity and all living life, you know, because she observed the suffering of all living life. It's not only humanity, but, you know, animals, everybody suffers, right, eventually. So she decided that she's going to reach enlightenment to save everybody. So she was like bodhisattva, you know, she wanted to reach enlightenment to save everybody from the suffering. And she went to the Buddhist monks who told her, in this case, Princess Yeshe, you have to first reincarnate as a man, because as a woman, you cannot get enlightened. And she says, no, I'm not going to wait for this. I'm going to reach enlightenment as I am as a woman. And the rest is history, right? So this is the beautiful Tara, who basically stood in her beautiful feminine divine, so to speak. She was not listening to the prevalent views of her times, you know, that only men can reach enlightenment, and she enlightened as a woman, right? And her beautiful representations are such that she has one foot in the world of spirit, in symbolical ways, representations, and one foot in the world. So, and this is very important, kind of metaphor for divine feminine, the divine feminine between the bridge between material world and a spiritual world. So her one foot is in the spiritual world, and her one foot, the one that goes forward, is in the material world. So she is the bridge for humanity, and in fact for all being things, whole life, between the material life or physical life, our three-dimensional life, and our spiritual life. And this is probably one of the best representations for me of a divine feminine as this bridge between divine and between material or physical. So can I just move on, or do we have any questions? No, can we move on?
Yes, there was a comment on Facebook, which I think it would be relevant to address while we're talking about the Divine Mother. From Matthew Martin, and he said the greatest unifying goddess of the divine is our common Mother Earth.
Absolutely, and I'm going to discuss it later. Yes, so that's why it's spot on, Matthew, because what I was saying here, this kind of literal rather than mystical understanding of virginity, right, is that it disconnects her from nature. And I intuitively, as I was growing up, I felt that there is something wrong with it because, and now when I conceptualize it and I saw other definitions of divine feminine, this is what divine feminine is actually supposed to do, being the bridge between the spirit and matter. And of course, earth as such is also divine feminine. And I'm going to discuss it later when I discuss indigenous traditions, because as I said in the beginning, I think they actually got it right? We just went all around and around and around when we actually had it right from the beginning. So thank you for this comment, and I completely agree. Yes, I completely agree. So this is already kind of, I just wanted to show disconnection from the physical world when Tara creates the connection between the spirit and nature. And another kind of, we could talk about archetypes of the divine feminine, and now I'm moving to what normally is being called a myth, but it's also history, but it's a narrative really of a divine feminine as well. Goddess, divine feminine as a creatrix. So there were cultures in the past that portrayed the goddess, the divine feminine, as the life giver, right from the beginning. So it's because in Western traditions, we assume that there's this, creator father, and then there are some other maybe feminine like Mother Mary or, so on deities. But here they started with the creatrix. So it's quite interesting. So for example, and as you see, this is already what, 6,500 years, right, ago. So in Sumer, which is the oldest Western civilization, and there are many alternative theories about it too, we had goddess Nimna. I'm not sure if I chose the right image here because I think it's actually flipped over. But I got this description of this image from Joseph Campbell in his book on Feminine Divine, which I highly recommend. Feminine Divine by Joseph Campbell. And he says that goddess Nimna, and it's really interesting because all of his symbolism was later translated not only to Judaism, but also to Christianity and ancient Egypt, but it all started there. So I will show you this symbolism. I'm getting excited. See? So the symbolism is such. So we have a goddess sitting on the throne. And she is the main deity because across from the tree, which is a tree of life, there is a man sitting, or a young god, and he has horns on his head. And according to Joseph Campbell, who is probably the most famous mythologist, horns signify the reflected light or moonlight of the sun or of the goddess. So it's quite interesting, do you see, because at the very beginning, the goddess is the sun, and the god, the masculine, is the reflected light, which is the moon. Nowadays, we think that the goddess is the reflected light. So just quite interesting how it all developed. And the goddess has the serpent behind her. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go to alternative explanations here, which are mythological explanations, because I think that the serpent can represent two things here. Let's go away from, serpent as a bad guy for a moment, right? Because in some Gnostic traditions, serpent is actually the wisdom giver. And why? Because serpent, for example, in Hinduism represents Kundalini Shakti, right? Which is the divine energy which is moving through our body. And especially erect snake or serpent represents the awakened Kundalini energy. So some people say that she's awakening the male god, right, to a higher consciousness, right? And another explanation is that some people say that this is the helix, DNA helix, right? And what is interesting about the story, because Sumerian stories are very complex, but nowadays scientists say that about 98 or even more % of our DNA is so-called junk DNA, because what it means that scientists don't know what it is about, right? So it's like unawakened DNA. And some people say that she's awakening the spiritual DNA in this male god. Also, interestingly, in mythological narratives, the tree of life represents the portal between divine and spiritual. I'm sorry, between physical and spiritual. So it's the portal between spiritual and between physical. And this portal is between the goddess and the god. So again here, the divine feminine is this kind of bridge or somehow between the spiritual and the physical. Not only that, she's offering the fruit of life to the young god. And this is also interpreted in two ways, either that she actually is the creatrix, or another one that she gives him a spiritual life, you know, and that's why the awakened serpent behind her. So if anybody has, if there are no questions, I would like to move on, because I think this is actually the central story in Western mysticism and in all Western traditions, because later they are being used in Abrahamic religions, but with a completely different twist, right? So we are going to get into this. But this is what we need to remember. The goddess now is also connected somehow to the tree of life, to the giver of life or giver of spiritual life or awakened consciousness. And she is, you know, in this portal between spirit and matter. Okay, so, and a little bit like the Tara, goddess Tara was, right? One leg here, one leg there. Here it is in very complex Sumerian narratives of the goddess Ninma, which was later used in Western religions with a different twist. And although I want to focus on Western religions, I just would like to mention also the Mago, because I have a friend, scholar Helen Huang, who talks about the ancient Korean goddess as first time people, accounts of her around 4000 BC, around the same time as Nimna occurred, and she is also the creatrix. And she's also between spirit and matter, because she's also called the shaman goddess. And shaman is between spaces, right? Liminal spaces, which means between spirit and matter. You know, it's kind of on a threshold between two worlds, between dimensions, maybe in a modern language, right? And also, interestingly, she's called the mother of Tao, you know? So not only Mago is this creatrix, but also all women who follow the tradition of Mago are giving the power to be this portal. So it's very interesting in itself. However, she couldn't rely on any academic resources. She had to go to folklore, Korean folklore, because Mago was completely repressed, the same like Nimna in the West. And then, you know, Taoism became about Lao Tzu. And then, you know, where other Confucianism came, then, you know, different religions came, which are all dominated by masculine divine, right? And the feminine divine was pushed away. So I just thought that I would mention Mago because it's very few people know about it, apart from some scholars of Korean folklore. And she's pretty much contemporary of Ninma, right, in Sumer. So, and she has the same kind of power of being in between two worlds, like interdimensional, so to speak, goddess. Okay, and now we are moving to what some people really love, because we are moving to goddess Inanna. I have a blog called Goddess News Blog, and most people, most women will ask me questions apart from Mary Magdalene. It's either about goddess Inanna or goddess Isis, right? Because they are very powerful goddesses. So we are moving away now from the goddess as the central figure, like the creatrix, like Ninma in Sumer, towards a central deity. So she is central, but there are other gods, right? Which are both masculine and feminine. And Inanna was probably the most powerful feminine goddess of Mesopotamia and Babylon. She's also known as later as Ishtar and so on. So Inanna, Ishtar, it's basically the same story. And I just want you, and she was also the goddess, she was goddess of everything, of war, of fertility, and so on. And however, she's always portrayed, this is again not a very good image, with a serpent with a serpent. You remember all the goddesses with a serpent and with a reed. So serpent and a reed. The reed is also the same, has the same representation and meaning as the tree, which means she is in control, you see, of this portal, because the reed is also the portal between the physical and spiritual. So she's in this vortex between spiritual and material. She can lead us in between these two worlds. She's the connection between these two worlds. And also the serpent. So it's quite interesting. And she was a very powerful goddess. And in fact, she had many temples throughout Mesopotamia. And one of her most famous priestesses was a great poet. Her name is Enheduanna. So there's a beautiful book called Inanna, Lady of Largest Heart. And it is the beautiful poems by Enheduanna, who was her high priestess, who was a daughter of a king. And also she was, and it's really important when I later speak about Mary Magdalene, they were supposed to be, again, virgins and Virgin Mary, but virgins in a spiritual sense, not in a physical sense. How do we know for sure? Because during times when they were celebrating fertility, a priestess of Inanna would choose among handsome young men as her consorts to ensure fertility of the lands. So, and yet she was still called as a virgin, because virginity was basically the openness to the divine, not a physical virginity. Unfortunately, this ritual later was misinterpreted by later religions as you know, they called her abomination, that she was a prostitute. And later it was stuck also to Mary Magdalene, because, you know, she was participating in this, you know, sexual rituals while still being a virgin, which means pure spiritually, right? So this is Inanna, and I just want to stress again, she's represented with a serpent and with a reed. And again, this kind of ability to move between material and physical world, like almost interdimensional ability. Basically, the same goddess. So I would like to argue that Nimna is not very different from Inanna, or Inanna is not very different from Nimna, right? Because they have the same symbolism, and mythology, it is very important, the symbolism. The serpent and the tree of life, or the reed, which is the same as the tree. Isis is another representation of the same goddess, in my opinion. This is just my opinion, and you can disagree. Because Isis is very similar to Inanna. And actually, in Inanna's story, for the first time, we have a story of resurrection. Why? Because I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but anyway, she was tricked to go into the underworld. Okay, and once she went into the underworld, she couldn't come back, because once you die, you're pretty much done, right? Yeah. However, she managed through good networking, and she was a bit of a trickster to get out. Okay, she managed to get out. However, she had to bring somebody else for 6 months into the world, into the underworld. And what did she do? She asked her lover, Dumuzi, to come down and as a sacrifice, actually, to the underworld. So for 6 months he lived on the underworld, and for 6 months he was coming back to earth, right? And the reason I think why she asked him to do this, it was a little bit of a punishment, because when she was lost in the underworld, he assumed her power, right? He sat on the throne. So now she told him, as a punishment, he has to go for 6 months, for half a year, into the underworld as a also prize, because she reached this deal, so to speak, with the underworld, the gods of the underworld. And she was, you know, she was scot-free, so to speak, but he had to spend 6 months in the underground, in the world of underground, which is already the first story of resurrection, which is very familiar for anybody in Christian tradition. The young god being sacrificed, you know, but here for the sake of the goddess. Yeah. So this is the same story, I think. So, but you are really, I'm happy if you disagree. It's okay. This is just Joanna's version of divine feminine. And then the story is basically repeated in Isis, which is a slightly younger goddess than Inanna. And I argue that Nimna, Inanna, Isis, Mary Magdalene are the same goddesses. And so Isis in ancient Egypt has the same story, right? Her beloved, Osiris, is being killed by his evil brother Set out of jealousy. And she manages to temporarily resurrect him. So we have a resurrection, right? Enough to conceive a child with him. Okay, which is Horus, child. And also, I was looking for the same symbolism in this goddess. And I was thinking, okay, where is the reed? Where is the tree? Where is the serpent, right? And I realized that the ancient symbol of Ankh, that lots of people who are interested in ancient Egypt love, is actually, you know, it can be a reed, it can be a snake, you know, like here. And here you have already a kind of first cross, so to speak, right? The sign and the cross actually, even in mystical Christianity, suggests the meeting of matter and spirit. This is what it actually means in mystical terms. It later was made into something else, cruelty and so on and so on. But basically cross, and here we have like a first cross with a little bit of a serpent here. It represents the meeting of spirit and matter. And she also, Isis, was the first, she was the great magician of Egypt also. So she, as a magician also, she could cross, you know, between life and death. It is quite interesting because Isis is actually talking about high magic. What is a high magic? We have to make a definition between high magic and lower magic. Lower magic, and this is what we usually know as magic nowadays, is manipulating earthly elements, you know, to get something. When higher magic, it is getting straight to the divine mind. So for example, you feel that something is wrong, so you say incantations that change the whole structure of the world. It's almost like jumping into different quantum universe, so to speak. So it's not that you manipulate what is around you, but you actually change the whole structure of the universe, right? It's like quantum jumping, so to speak. So she goes straight to the divine mind. And it's quite interesting because, as in every magic, but it comes actually from the tradition of Isis, you know, there are special incantations. So you do it in the name of Isis. So then you basically are open to her guidance, right? That she takes it further. So if you do any incantations in ancient Egypt, you do it either 3 times because it's a sacred number, or 7 times because it's a number of Isis. So if it's 7 times, you like bring the authority of Isis there as well, right? So this is about the higher magic, when you actually have the power, again, between spirit and matter and between creation to like rewind the matrix, so to speak, right? She knows how to like change the matrix. Yeah. So, and this is what you can do through higher magic, you know, which is a form of creation. So if there are no questions, I will move to the rest. So I'm moving to a closer times, but also very closely related to, for example, ancient Egypt. And now also we are getting closer to Palestine and Christianity. Sophia. So goddess Sophia is a Gnostic Sophia, is a Gnostic goddess. And she can be understood in many ways. First of all, she's understood as the goddess of wisdom. She's the divine wisdom. Sophia in Greek means wisdom, right? And she's the divine wisdom. Unfortunately, because I studied early Christianity at the Pontifical Institute, once, because it was a Trinity, Father, Son, and Sophia, the Holy Wisdom, which was feminine. And once Sophia was translated from Greek into Latin, they translated her as Spiritus Sanctus, which is basically masculine or neuter. But basically in Latin, it's actually masculine. So it became that suddenly these 3 masculine figures, right? So when actually it should be Father, Son, and Sophia, Holy Wisdom, as the feminine one. And there are many mythological stories about Sophia, but to make a long story shorter, she basically is one of the light beings who wanted to know the divine creation and were attracted somehow to the lower creation, to the material world, through the reflected light of the divine, of God. and she fell into a three-dimensional world. So very often she's treated as the metaphor for a human soul. Why? Because once she fell into matter, she forgot, either she forgot who she was, and now she's wandering around completely lost in the materiality of the world, probably, you know, trying to live in a good suburb, having a good car, having a good job, right? Or she knows what she is, but she doesn't know how to get back, which is even more tragic, right? So she represents both a knowledge that we are more than we are at the moment, and also the entrapment in our physical world, in a way. Not that physical world is bad, but basically we are entrapped in the trappings of the world, right? We are buying to certain things, right? Which are not actually physical necessarily, not natural, like natural world, but physical, human mind created things, like good job, good, you know, good, you know, completely lost in this, right? So she either completely got lost in some stories, and other stories she knows who she is, but she cannot get out. She doesn't know how to reach her human and divine potential. And that's why I love this goddess, because I think we are all pretty much as humanity in this situation, right? Like, we know that we have this divine potential, but we are struggling to fulfill it. We have this sense of, you know, something is not happening, you know, and I don't know why, right? We have this ability, but we are trapped in a rational mind, which is a very practical mind. And that's why Sophia also often stands for divine wisdom, which means, in kind of parlance of New Age, you could say intuition. Intuition, which is a higher wisdom, which is above rational mind. In Gnostic terms, it would be called nous. And nous is the space between material world, again, and a divine mind, right? Or she's often, in Christian terms, she's also called, she represents intellection, which is this higher understanding. Or if you're interested in Vedanta and Hinduism, it's Buddhi, the higher mind, which is capable of spiritual perception. So it's like having this higher mind, but being entrapped in three-dimensional reality. That's why I think she's a beautiful metaphor for a human soul. And very often, she's also represented, and this comes close again to both Mary Magdalene and also Inanna and Ishtar. She's represented as a prostitute very often in mythology. Why? And so there's some kind of, and she's also called often prunikos, which is basically promiscuous, right? So it's very, I think that in this there's a connection to Ishtar and Inanna, you know. But also, some people say that this being a prostitute, it means we are all kind of prostituting ourselves because we forget our divine potential. We are just completely trapped in complete nonsense that we created for ourselves through our lower mind, which is a rational mind. And we forget this ability for spiritual mind that we actually have, which is holy wisdom, which she represents, and divine wisdom. But again, in many stories, she's the prostitute, you know, and for example, in one story, Simon Magus in Latin, or Simon the magician, you know, finds her in a brothel and, you know, saves her and so on. So it's a little bit of a male imagination here, because she's this beautiful prostitute also, very much like Mary Magdalene, supposedly. And but I think that there's again metaphorical meaning here, which is, you know, she represents us, our soul, you know, we who know our divine potential and somehow do not know how to fully maybe find it in our lives, yeah, in our embodiment. And then,
Joanna, can I please ask a question now?
Absolutely.
So I do want to ask this and make a connection, because you're referring to Sophia as a metaphor for human soul. We all familiar with the term Gaia, which is a name for our beautiful planet Earth, but perhaps not many people are familiar with the term Gaia Sophia. So Gaia Sophia is sometimes used as a metaphor or as a name for the energetic field around our planet Earth, which is the frequency that can easily be connected to a human soul. So I just kind of want to make that connection, or just to ask a question if that's of any relevance to your knowledge and your teachings.
Actually, thank you for bringing it up, Irina. And I was actually not aware of it. So I have learned something, so thank you so much. But it makes perfect sense for me, because even in mythological sense, you know, Sophia basically like fell in, you know, from above, right? So she fell in, and she's also, and this is what I should probably explain, she's also our way back to the divine, right? So in this sense, it makes completely perfect sense, right? So that connecting Gaia with Sophia, which is basically this kind of intuitive knowing, right? Intuitive, holistic knowing that she represents, but she's somehow repressed, meaning like she's not totally empowered. And this is what, you know, I really hope for Gaia. And this is when I talk about goddesses later, I want to close it this way. So I thank you that you brought it up. It is that I have no argument with masculine at all. You know, I love men, and I, you know, and so on. However, what really breaks my heart, and I forgot to say this when I was talking about Divine Mother, because Andrew Harvey asks in his book about the Divine Mother, ask yourself what breaks your heart, and there you'll be close to Divine Mother. What really breaks my heart is, for example, the subjugation of nature, but also, and you know, and I feel that we talk about Gaia, but somehow I feel that Gaia is innocent and at the same time abused, and we are the abusers of Gaia. We are abusers of not only nature, which is part of Gaia, but I also personally believe that nature is divine as well, and I'm going to discuss it in coming slides, that nature is divine, that this distinction between mind and spirit is actually artificial in many ways. So, you know, I'm just kind of building up into this. So what breaks my heart, and that's why I think that just intuitively, because I don't have all the answers, I think that it has to do something with divine feminine being completely edited out, you know, out of the narratives, is that Gaia feels so abused and somehow powerless. You know what I mean? Although she's powerful, but look, we abuse her, so she's in a way like this receptive mother that puts up with all of this nonsense from us. And sometimes I feel like, you know, speak up. So this presentation is a little about that. You know, I want the divine feminine to speak up, and then the divine feminine for me is also Gaia, right? Like, speak up, do something. You provide for us, but we do not appreciate it, right? You know, you speak up. You know, so I'm just trying to find empowered feminine, which is not this kind of aggressive feminine that very often women put on, you know, when they act out of a masculine side, right? But what is it actually? I wanted to finish this presentation with this question. What is this that actually is this empowered feminine? Do we even know what it is, right? And also, how can we empower Gaia energetically? And I think it's
I just wanted to add, empowered feminine is not aggressive, it's fierce.
That's right, it's fierce, and I want her to be fierce, right? I want her also, Gaia, to become fierce. You know, she has to be fierce. We need to be disciplined if we are her children, definitely. So when I was just talking about Inanna and Isis, I also wanted to mention that also in Judaism, there was Asherah. So in the times of the first temple, there was Yahweh and his wife Asherah, and she also was edited out. And now in Israel, there are archaeological findings that show, you know, from ancient times, you know, the representation of Yahweh and Asherah. And in fact, recently there was a beautiful book written when a god had a wife, you know, because this is, people are starting to look into it. Where is the divine feminine? You know, why do we have this kind of divine, you know, with only the masculine? What happened to divine feminine, right? And how can we explore it? So this is just my exploration, right? So some people may not like it, and that's perfectly fine. but I'm just exploring different versions of the divine feminine. And in my blog, I called myself a spiritual detective, and this is what I'm doing. I don't have teachings. I'm just exploring what are our possibilities, right? Because I'm a spiritual seeker and a spiritual detective, so to speak. So Mary Magdalene is a very fascinating figure for me because first of all, and I hope that by now everybody knows that she was not a prostitute ever, you know, and I think just mythologically she was connected to this prostitution thing because of Sophia, because of misunderstanding Inanna, you know, she was not a prostitute. In fact, she was a goddess and her priestesses were not prostitutes, you know, were priestesses, right, and so on. So, and I think there's a kind of continuation between this goddessism and Mary Magdalene. Another reason why Mary Magdalene, just trying not to be judgmental, although sometimes it's difficult, is that in the 4th century, there was another Mary, Mary of Egypt, who was a prostitute and went to Palestine and became a hermit, and she became a very popular saint. And later, people started to completely confuse Mary Magdalene with Mary of Egypt. You know, two completely different people. And in fact, I think there's a famous sculpture, I believe by Donatello, which shows this penitent woman, you know, on a desert, and it's Mary Magdalene 20 years later, something on a desert as a penitent on a desert as a meditator. But in fact, it was Mary of Egypt, and it was by Donatello. So by Renaissance, everybody, you know, completely confused one with another. And another, from a scriptural point of view, Pope Gregory in 591, which is 6th century, made a scriptural mistake and confused Mary Magdalene with the woman sinner in the Bible. And in 1969, the Catholic Church admitted that, you know, there is no scriptural connection between prostitution and Mary Magdalene. Also, even the woman sinner was not necessarily a prostitute, because the sinner was the word for the sinner with reference to that woman, who was not Mary Magdalene, by the way. There's no connection between them, as far as we know, was harmatolos. Harmatolos means somebody who broke Jewish law. And it could be anything. Like maybe you ate during Sabbath, you didn't pay your taxes, you were married to a foreigner, you know, or something like that. When the prostitute means foreign, and this was never used with reference to that woman sinner or Mary Magdalene. So it's just, you know, completely made up story, bad scholarship, you know, at best, right? So she was not a prostitute. So once I make my case here. Okay, and Mary Magdalene very often in mystical sources is considered Sophia in Jesus's life, which means the feminine wisdom in Jesus's life. Very often also his consort. Some people argue that Jesus was married because he was a rabbi. In other sources, they said he was not married, but she was still his consort. So, you know, we probably will never find marriage certificate, but many sources say that she was in one way or another his consorts. Also in Gnostic teachings, she's considered the person with whom Jesus shared his highest, most esoteric teachings. Right, that's why the same connection with Sophia here, right, as a God's wisdom, and just as a form of scholarship, in case people don't know it, although I think by now it's such a popular figure that people know about it. But in 19th century, I think exactly 1896, I think there was a Gnostic document discovered in Egypt called the Gospel of Mary, and it's Mary Magdalene teaching other disciples what Jesus taught her in secret. And Peter gets very jealous because he says, how come, you know, the teacher told you these things and he didn't share them with us, right? So, and there are other Gnostic sources such as Pistis Sophia that mention that Mary Magdalene was the favorite disciple as a spiritual partner of Jesus, so to speak, right, with whom he shared, and Gospel of Philip when she's considered his consort and so on. So it's quite interesting that, you know, this is now coming up, you know, all of these ancient resources and sources are being discovered, like in Nag Hammadi in 1945, other documents that, you know, kind of bring up the divine feminine into the surface, right? Maybe before we were not ready to know about it, and now we know. And there is, of course, Margaret Starbett, who is talking about Holy Grail. Mary Magdalene is the Holy Grail, which means that Mary Magdalene was actually married to Jesus and that they had a child and so on. And that's a very popular story because people, Margaret Starbott is arguing that Mary Magdalene, as a wife of Jesus, adds this feminine element into Christianity, right? As an equal person, so to speak, as an equal divine. But I wonder if Holy Grail is actually completely misunderstood, and maybe Holy Grail is our own inner transformation. Because again, Mary Magdalene, like in the story of Inanna, like in the story of Isis, she's present there at the crucial moment of the young God's time when he's going through complete transformation, right? She is there present at the resurrection, like Isis, for example, right? Completely present at the resurrection. And it's quite, so she is again kind of at the moment of this portal, right? When the physical becomes spiritual. She is there, like other goddesses, right? Because resurrection is when physical becomes spiritual. And it's quite interesting because in this moment in garden, when she sees resurrected Jesus, and even in canonical Bible, she's the first one to see him, he says, "Do not touch me," but it actually means translation again from the Greek, because what he says actually, "Do not hold on to me because I have not ascended yet." Because Latin Bible was translated from Greek. Okay, and lots of fathers of the church didn't know, like St. Augustine, Greek very well. So basically, do not hold on to me because I have not ascended yet, which basically means like, you know, do not hold on to me because, you know, I'm still in the process of transformation, right? From the material to spiritual. When in the traditional way, it was translated, do not touch me, you know, you dirty prostitute, basically implicitly, right? Because you're a woman and also probably a prostitute. But in fact, he says, do not hold on to me because I have not ascended yet. Completely different. And he says, when she sees him, he says, Rabbini, my beloved teacher. And he says, do not hold on to me because I have not ascended yet. A very beautiful story, right? And again, here, Mary Magdalene is this goddess, this divine feminine that is present at the process of transfiguration and transformation, to this possibility that is open for all of us to be fully human and to be fully divine, like Anthropos, or the Son of God, as Jesus was called. So I probably should move on because I got carried away about.
Yes, I just want to remind of time. We've got 10 to 12 minutes.
Okay. So the reason why I was talking about it, because actually this theme of the goddess or the feminine divine being this bridge between the world of physical and material was very present in all traditional indigenous beliefs, in shamanism and indigenous traditions. So for example, in the Hopi tradition, you know, there is a grandmother spider, and this is a representation of a grandmother spider who is the weaver and the web at the same time. So she's almost like in quantum mechanics, you know, like in quantum physics, she's the energy that creates everything, right? And she is the creation. So there is no separation between the creator and the creation in indigenous traditions, like the grandmother spider. She is the weaver, the one who weaves, and the web. So there's no separation, God and creation. Creation and divine is the same. Even in indigenous European traditions, the Celts were talking about Elfame. What is Elfame? Elfame, or they're talking about Queen of Elfame, which were so-called witches. Elfame is the space, again, liminal space, which is between spirit and matter, when shamans and witches can go to, where all creations happen. So this is the space of the goddess, right? Where there is this kind of threshold between spirit and matter, and where spirit and matter are actually one, and only our rational minds are disconnecting them from each other. There's a spirit and matter, but actually matter, nature is spiritual as well, right? It's an expression of spirit, like grandmother spider, who is weaving the net, the web, but she's also the web as well, right? So it's not separate. She's not separate from creation, right? So, so in some sense, probably you could say, like with Gaia traditions as well, that I'm probably a pantheist, because I totally believe that trees are divine, that animals are divine. In many ways, they're much more intelligent, emotionally intelligent than we are, and that it's our rational mind that actually disconnects us from nature and separates spirit from nature, when in fact they are not separate. It's just a function of our rational mind. So I know I have to speed up, so what? I think I want to finish so what, because people say, who cares about all of these goddesses, right? First of all, I wanted to point out that yes, divine feminine is really mistreated in existing religions, all of them. And I can give you personal examples from all religions around the world, you know. But in fact, it is probably the oldest tradition of the divine. When you go back deeply into mythology, you know, the goddesses are there right from the beginning, and only later they were edited out. And there's a history to it, which, you know, I don't have time to discuss it now. But she was there. Divine feminine is there, and we desperately need her now, because I honestly believe that this destruction of the natural environment and the fact that we are acting in a very crazy system has to do something, although I don't know exactly what, with the editing out of the divine feminine from all our mythologies and system of beliefs. Now, another writer, Kant, says it is the cosmic goddess, or the holy grail, I like this, of theoretical physics, searching for the unified field where everything connects with everything. So goddess connects everything. She is the interconnectivity. So you cannot, a goddess, if we had some kind of concept of a divine feminine, a goddess in this sense, we would not be able to destroy nature, so we are doing well, because we would understand that holistically, we are one with nature. I feel like saying, you idiot, you destroyed nature, you destroy yourself, even if you don't care for nature. How come you cannot understand that, right? So it is, she's the unifying element, the divine feminine, right? Not only the threshold between spirit and matter, but actually she is creating everything, and she is that. So I also would like to say that the feminine aspect of the divine needs to be reintroduced to our narratives of the divine, because otherwise we can talk and, you know, have wonderful meetings about unity and change, but it's all a pretense, because the goddess accepts everyone. We cannot say, you know, and I really loved what Marianne Williamson did during our last Parliament of Religions. He says, okay, all of these people are talking about interfaith, you know, where are women? You know, where's the divine feminine, you know, nature and so on? We have to, you know, otherwise it's just all religions talking to each other, but nothing changes. Women are still oppressed, nature is still oppressed, right? So we have to include absolutely everyone, and we have to include also the feminine divine, and we actually do not know really how to act it out. We have to explore it. So the divine feminine needs to be included as a joint mission by both women and men and everybody in mainstream narratives, because she was edited out from them for the last 3,000 years at least. Now, we as women have to take responsibility. By that, I mean that it's not that putting women in power is not really an answer, although it's a good step. Because if a woman doesn't know how to be truly powerful as a woman, she's not going to be different from a powerful man, right? So we as women have to go on this search, you know? What is it that can be a powerful yet compassionate feminine? What is it? Like, we have to go. That's why I say journaling is really important. This should be focus of a meditation. We cannot wait for anybody to tell us, you know, who am I as Joanna, as Irina, as Morgan, as Betsy? Who am I as Betsy, let's say, as a powerful yet compassionate feminine? To contemplate this, Who is the creatrix with me, and how would she act to make this world a better place, to bring nature and humanity together, you know, because this distraction has to stop, you know. Gaia is crying, I want Gaia to be powerful in her own Gaia way. And this is also a responsibility not only of women, but also of men, who also have, of course, feminine aspect in them, animus anima, and I spoke about it in my last talk. Men also have a feminine in them. We all have to discover this. What is it to, what is the empowered feminine that is compassionate? And this is the only way. And we are this helix, we are this space, this portal between material and physical. We bring it together, but how? This is something to consider. And this is an inner job. So we cannot just, and of course it's okay to be angry and fierce and so on, right? But actually we have to take responsibility. Yes, abuse happened and it still happens and it's terrible. But we cannot stay in victim consciousness. We have to take power into our hands and discuss, and we have to discuss and meditate upon what is a pathway of compassionate feminine. And only this kind of empowered but compassionate feminine can be an equal partner to the masculine divine, and then the destruction of this beautiful planet will end and we will all evolve, we will all ascend. Without it, it's a pretense, it's a pretense, it's a pretense. And finally, I would like to say that there is no change without inner change. That's why, as I said, it is an inner job, And I really loved Ben's interview with Deepak Chopra, because Deepak Chopra said everything that I was thinking, just didn't dare to say. And I think everybody felt the same, right?
Yes, I felt
because we can have all kinds of movements. We can have all kinds of, but if there's no inner change, we are just going to ruin everything again. Unless we evolve, unless we somehow bring this other part to our divine consciousness, which is also the feminine divine, which is all about interconnectivity and the threshold between spirit and matter, we are going to destroy and create out of the same lower consciousness, which is good for nothing. That's why, for example, when I hear about humanity going to Mars, I'm depressed, because I say, now we are going to ruin Mars. Let's fix things on Earth. And for this, we have to work on ourselves. We have to first do what we have to first do. It's inner revolution.
Joanna, I'm sorry. Morgana has a question.
Okay.
If you can answer it quickly, because we do have another session. 4 minutes late, so I'll read the question out, and then if you can just answer it in a minute, and then we'll have to close it. So Morgana is saying, do you think the divine feminine, such as Mary Magdalene, is present now on our planet to meditate us through into the new age?
Absolutely. And I very personally got obsessed with her. It's a completely separate journey. And then I realized that nearly every woman on this planet is meditating on Mary Magdalene. I just learned it because of my blog. So everybody, it's like a big awakening of Mary Magdalene. And I think she is definitely leading us. And I think that she's connected to the most ancient goddesses, which represented wisdom and compassion, and connection with the divine, also sexuality and divine mind and everything. She represents all of us. So definitely, I think she's basically coming up in a collective unconscious, so to speak, and bringing herself up to consciousness. And her time has truly come right now. And I think if you are part of the Western tradition, she is definitely the one to contemplate and ask for help. And I completely, totally believe that.
Thank you so much. We'll have to wrap up the session. We do have another one coming up. So thank you so much. Once again, this was an amazing presentation and discussion, and so many good points about the divine feminine throughout the history, the misrepresentations of certain roles and characters, but also how it all sort of ties up together, and especially what we're going through in current times. So thank you so much, Dr. Joanna Kujawa. I have popped the link to your blog under the live video on Facebook. If for those that still have questions, please feel free to connect with Dr. Joanna, and I'm sure that she'll go and answer some of your comments and questions on Facebook.
Yes, so thank you. I will do this now. Yeah. Thank you so much, and thank you for everybody who showed up. It's really an honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.